What if everything you called pain was never just pain? What if the suffering that tears you apart inside isn't a coincidence, nor random punishment, nor a simple consequence of life, but a signal, one message, one divine invitation, hidden behind what you most fear facing? Before continuing, take a deep breath, because the biblical truth about suffering is not gentle, it is not comfortable, and it is not for the weak. It breaks through, it exposes, it illuminates. And when it arrives, nothing within you remains the same, because the question that unlocks everything is simple, direct, and devastating. What exactly is suffering according to the Scriptures? Is he divine punishment? When does God correct what is straying from the path? Is he ordeal, a test designed to reveal who you are when no one is looking? Or is he a spiritual attack, is the shadow of the enemy trying to break down precisely what God wants to raise up? Or, and here's the point that turns the world upside down for anyone, is suffering a divine calling, a celestial call to something you haven't yet seen, understood, or accessed? Yes, because the Bible doesn't treat suffering as an emotional accident, it treats suffering as a spiritual setting, a stage. An invisible encounter between heaven and earth, between the eternal and the fleeting, between purpose and chaos. Pain is not just pain. Pain is territory. Pain is discourse. Pain is movement. And each gap, each silence, each dark night, each burnt tear carries a spiritual architecture that almost no one perceives, because almost everyone is too busy trying to escape it. But whether you run away or not, suffering knows exactly where to find you. It approaches when you most desire rest, the instant you most want answers, the phase in which you most doubt everything. And when it arrives, it dismantles the ego, disarms pride, exposes the soul like an open wound before the sky. Suffering is the strong wind that no one controls. It is the storm that asks no permission. It is the question that time places at the door of your life. Why are you experiencing what you're experiencing? The Scriptures repeat something that many ignore. Pain speaks. And she speaks in a way that only God understands first, and only you understand later, because pain can be discipline, it can be refinement, it can be a battle. But above all, pain can be an invitation to awaken. And that's exactly why suffering is so unsettling, because it reveals what you don't want to see. It brings to light what you don't want to face. It exposes truths you've tried to hide even from yourself. And by exposing them, it pushes you towards a choice. Either you run away or you awaken. Now, before we delve deeper into this journey, because we're going to enter biblical and spiritual levels that practically no one dares to touch, I need you to do something simple but crucial. If this video has already started to stir up a part of your soul that you've always avoided, stop now, leave a like and subscribe, because you can't miss what comes next. The next part will further dismantle the invisible layers of suffering and reveal what most people go their whole lives without discovering. Stay, because what you're about to hear may completely redefine how you see your pain, and perhaps reveal that it was never your enemy. Before we continue, I need you to do something that many people neglect, but that it completely changes the experience of this video. If this content has already begun to affect you, if any phrase touched an old wound, if any revelation sparked a flash of understanding, then comment below, say what you felt in the first few minutes, say which part resonated with you, say where this message found you. This isn't just engagement, this is discernment. When you write, you organize. When you comment, you understand. When you speak, you name what consumes you, and take advantage of it. Leave a like and subscribe before we move on. Because the next layers of this video are too profound for you to miss. This topic is sensitive, it's spiritual, it's a watershed moment, and every detail you don't watch could be exactly the detail that brings clarity to your pain. So comment, like, and subscribe now. Not because everyone asks, but because it keeps you here, steadfastly following every part of this necessary dive. Let's continue, because the next revelation will confront you in a way you may never have imagined. Pain never comes alone. It always carries something behind it, a presence, a struggle, a spiritual whisper that tries to touch precisely the point where your soul is most sensitive. And it is here that almost no one understands what really happens. Suffering is not just a human sensation, it is a hidden scenario, a spiritual territory where three forces meet. God, the enemy, and you. Pain is the stage where the visible and invisible worlds collide silently, intensely, inevitably. You feel it in your body, but it happens in your soul. You perceive it as emotion, but behind it lies purpose. There is war. There is divine contact. Most people live as if pain were merely biology, just chemistry, just trauma, just bad luck. But the scriptures show that it is a spiritual arena, a point of convergence where inner decisions can change entire destinies. And it is precisely here that human suffering becomes profound, because it reveals the truth about who you are, who attacks you, and who shapes you. Pain exposes what is hidden. It reveals desires, fears, patterns, old wounds you've tried to bury. And at the same time, it reveals God's presence trying to mold you, correct you, protect you, or guide you. That's why suffering seems so contradictory. While it weakens you, it confronts you. While it breaks you, it awakens you. While it wounds you, it guides you. It's as if pain were the voice you never wanted to hear, but which carries exactly the message you've needed for years. And in the center of this silent chaos, the enemy tries to use every rupture to distort, pressure, and manipulate. Suffering becomes a stage for spiritual attack, because it is precisely in fragility that darkness tries to enter. When you are happy, strong, and secure, your soul builds walls. But when you are wounded, tired, frustrated, everything becomes more vulnerable, more exposed, more accessible to that which tries to bring you down. That's why suffering is so strategic. God allows it as a tool, the enemy uses it as a trap, and you feel it as a battle. But the crucial point is to understand that this stage is not passive. It is alive. It reacts to the choices you make within it. Suffering can lead you to despair or guide you to awakening. It can open doors or lock them. It can bring you closer to God or push you into inner abysses. Pain doesn't mold on its own. It responds to what you do with it. That's why some become stronger after pain, while others become more bitter. That's why some find faith, and others lose their own light. Suffering doesn't automatically shape. It simply reveals what's inside, and what's inside defines what will come next. And when you begin to perceive suffering as this invisible stage, something changes. Because you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What is this revealing about me?" It is this change of question that begins to illuminate the hidden scene. Because pain doesn't appear to destroy, it appears to reveal. And when it reveals, it forces you to look at parts of yourself that were buried under layers of routine, pride, fear, and distraction. Deep down, pain forces you to face truths you've always run from. And only those who are ready face it. Only those who decide to stop running dive in. Only those who accept seeing what lies behind the veil understand. Suffering also unmasks the enemy. It is when the soul is fragile that you perceive attacks that previously went unnoticed, thoughts that are not yours, guilt you shouldn't carry, fears that were not born within you. Suffering amplifies these voices, but it also illuminates the presence of God, trying to guide you through the chaos, because while the enemy tries to distort, God tries to align. While the enemy tries to wound, God tries to strengthen. While the enemy whispers of surrender, God whispers of purpose. This duality is what transforms pain into a spiritual arena, where every second matters, every choice matters, every reaction changes the course of the battle. And perhaps that's exactly what you're experiencing right now. A phase where it seems like everything is crumbling, but in reality, something is being exposed. A phase where you feel you're losing, but in reality, you're being invited to see. A phase where you think you're alone, but in reality, you're at the center of a spiritual struggle that only happens to those who carry destiny. And destiny isn't built in comfort. It reveals itself in adversity. Everything that hurts you is being used to awaken you, and everything that wounds you is being observed from heaven, because nothing is random when it comes to the soul. Nothing. Before we move on to the next part, where we'll delve even deeper into the role of this invisible world and how it shapes your spiritual life, I want you to comment below with something simple yet powerful. Comment, "I see the invisible scenery." Or if you prefer something more personal, write, "I understand my pain." Write down what you feel, but write it down. It helps you. It helps the video, and it strengthens our journey together. Let's continue from here, exactly from this point where the invisible begins to make sense. The hardest part, and perhaps the most avoided, is dealing with the initial shock. God allows pain. Not because he is cruel, not because he wants to break you, not because he takes pleasure in your suffering, but because there is something in pain that no other human experience produces. And that is precisely the answer that almost no one wants to hear, because it dismantles our expectations about faith, about divine protection, about what it means to walk with God. Pain is not a spiritual accident. Pain is permitted when it fulfills a purpose that comfort could never achieve, and that in itself completely changes how you interpret everything you have experienced so far. Because when you understand that God allows pain, you begin to realize that he works not only through miracles, but also through ruptures. He speaks not only in blessings, but also in silences. He shapes not only in joy, but also in valleys. Pain, when permitted by God, is never meaningless. It is strategic. It changes course, breaks cycles, exposes lies, redefines paths. The problem is that to understand this, you need to abandon the limited vision of the God who only protects and begin to see the God who transforms. And transformation always involves discomfort, loss, shock, and internal confrontation. God allows pain when it is the only way to make you see what you would never see alone. And this is the most challenging point, because while we imagine that God should prevent every tear, he is, in fact, allowing precisely what will mature you spiritually. He allows it because he sees what you don't see. He allows it because he knows the future you haven't yet reached. He allows it because he knows who you need to become. And sometimes the only path to that stronger, more conscious, more discerning version of yourself passes precisely through the pain you are trying to avoid. Pain becomes a portal, a process, a calling. And those who don't understand this end up interpreting pain as abandonment, when in reality it is direction. And when you understand this dynamic, everything changes. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What is this revealing?" You stop interpreting pain as punishment and begin to see it as refinement. You abandon the view that God is hurting you and begin to understand that he is molding you. It's not easy to accept this. It's not simple. It's not pleasant, but it's true, and it's a truth that sets you free. Because when you realize that God is still present even in pain, you stop running away from it and begin to listen to what it is trying to teach you. The real shock isn't that God allows pain. The real shock is that he allows it to uplift you, to strengthen you, to prepare you, to free you from something you didn't realize, to pull you away from wrong alliances, toxic paths, destructive spiritual cycles, impulsive decisions that could ruin everything. God allows pain to distance you from invisible dangers, to cut old roots, to reveal camouflaged spiritual attacks, to open your eyes to what you weren't ready to see. There are pains that are deliverance. There are pains that are protection. There are pains that are answers. There are pains that are God's hand pulling you back to the axis you abandoned without realizing it. And that's why suffering hurts so much, because it deals with deep areas, sensitive areas, hidden areas. God doesn't touch the superficial when He truly wants to transform you. He touches the layers that sustain everything, and stirring these layers causes shock, resistance, tears. But without that, you would continue living on autopilot, following paths that would distance you from your greater purpose. Pain interrupts, and this interruption almost always seems unfair at first, but the purpose only appears later. First comes the shock, then comes understanding, first comes the rupture, then comes reconstruction. And this delay between the impact and the explanation is exactly what makes so many people believe that God has abandoned them, when in reality He is working more intensely than ever. And there is yet another layer. When God allows pain, He exposes the enemy. Only when you are vulnerable do you perceive the spiritual attacks that were previously hidden. It is precisely in pain that you distinguish what comes from God and what comes from darkness. When comfort dominates, the soul is distracted. When pain arrives, the soul awakens. In pain, you perceive the patterns that were silently destroying you. In pain, you perceive connections that should never have existed. In pain, you identify old lies that sabotaged your faith. Suffering illuminates what comfort hid, and this illumination changes everything. The real key is understanding that suffering authorized by God is never meant to destroy you. It's meant to unveil you. And this unveiling is the beginning of liberation. The pain God allows is the pain He also sustains. The pain God allows is the pain He transforms. The pain God allows is the one that leads you to the next stage, even if you don't understand it at first. Nothing in the spiritual life is accidental. Everything is observed, permitted, directed, or blocked by a greater divine intention. And when you accept this truth, something within you changes. You stop resisting the process and begin to walk within it. You stop fighting against God and begin to walk alongside Him. And this change in attitude opens doors that were previously closed. And before we move on, because from here on out we're going to delve into even deeper territory regarding purpose, spiritual warfare, and discernment, I want you to write something in the comments that will help you solidify this revelation. Comment, if God allowed it, He will transform it. Or if you prefer something more direct, write, I accept the process. This is not just engagement, it's a spiritual declaration. We will continue exactly from here, where the revelation begins to take shape. The enigma of Job explodes like an open wound at the heart of faith, because nothing about it makes sense at first glance. Job was not a rebellious man. He was not in hidden sin. He did not live in spiritual negligence. On the contrary, he was upright, devout, steadfast, a symbol of faithfulness in a world corroded by corruption. And it is precisely there that the question pierces the soul like a cold blade. Why did suffering fall upon him with such violence? Why did the righteous bleed while the wicked prospered? This contradiction is the most uncomfortable portal of Scripture, the mirror that forces each of us to confront the most secret side of the divine plan, because Job's suffering does not arise from chaos, bad luck, or coincidence. It arises from permission, a permission that few have the courage to face head-on. And when you observe the story without filters, you realize the real shock. Job's suffering didn't begin on earth, but in heaven. It wasn't born in the dust of his wounds, but in an invisible conversation that put at stake not only his life, but the very meaning of human faith, a cosmic test, a spiritual expose, a showcase to reveal what lies deepest in the heart of someone who serves God. It wasn't punishment, it wasn't abandonment, it wasn't divine neglect, it was revelation. And this revelation begins precisely when God allows the enemy to touch what Job most protected. This is the point that destroys flimsy explanations and reveals a brutal truth. Sometimes God allows pain not because you deserve to suffer, but because what you carry inside needs to be exposed, strengthened, and proven before a spiritual world that observes, accuses, and tries to destroy. Job was not wounded because he was weak. He was wounded because he was strong enough to carry a purpose greater than his own comfort. His suffering became the stage where God would show that true faithfulness does not depend on material blessings, nor on favorable moments, nor on human sensations. It is a faithfulness that remains even when everything crumbles. And when the enemy touches Job's life, the impact is not merely physical, it's existential. He loses everything. He loses family, wealth, health, dignity. He even loses his inner peace because his thoughts begin to scream questions that many of us try to hide. Why didn't God stop it? Why didn't he put up a barrier? Why did he let suffering cross the life of a righteous man? But there's a detail that completely changes the interpretation. God didn't lose control for a single second. Pain didn't invade Job's life as something loose, without direction, but as part of a carefully watched process. The enemy could only touch where God allowed. The limit was defined by the Creator himself, and this shows that even when pain seems devastating, it is never outside divine supervision. Job's suffering does not reveal God's absence, but a profound presence. A presence that purifies, exposes, strengthens, tests, and transforms. A presence that is not limited to preventing suffering, because preventing pain does not build character, does not cement faith, does not reveal essence. God's permission is not cruelty, it is strategy. A spiritual strategy against an enemy who believed that human faith was too fragile to survive without benefits. Job becomes the challenge that dismantles this accusation. And while the enemy tries to destroy, God uses the very attack as a tool of confirmation, making it clear that true faith is indestructible even when bleeding. And it is at this point in the story that suffering ceases to be tragedy and begins to reveal its hidden side. The righteous bleed not because God does not see, but because God sees beyond, because there is something happening behind the visible scene, something involving honor, testimony, character, glory, purpose, and spiritual shock. Job's pain is not the end of the story, it is the beginning of the revelation. And before we delve deeper into this mystery, I want you to actively participate in this journey with me. Comment, "I want to understand the purpose of pain," or simply write "purpose" if this part has already resonated with you. This helps the video reach more people and shows me that you are walking with me to the end of this revelation. Pain as a spiritual forge reveals itself precisely at the point where the story of Job begins to expose something that many don't want to admit. Pain doesn't arise merely to wound, but to mold. It's not just suffering, but a process. It's not only loss, but transformation. And when we face this head-on, without romanticizing, without sugarcoating, we realize that each break, each loss, each trial functions like hammer and fire, divine instruments that strike the soul not to destroy it, but to mold it into something that could not exist otherwise. God doesn't work gently when the purpose is great. He works with precision, intensity, and depth, because the faith he builds demands resilience that doesn't spring up in tranquil days. And it is here that we begin to understand the spiritual logic behind so many situations that have marked our lives without explanation. The loss that tore you apart, the door that closed, the friendship that crumbled, the betrayal that crushed you from the inside, the spiritual attack you felt in your flesh, mind, and soul. None of this is random. None of this is wasted. Each blow suffered becomes a part of the forging, because faith does not grow in calm. It grows in the collision between what you believe and what life delivers to you. It is in this clash that God reveals whether your trust is based on the stability of circumstances or on the solidity of divine purpose. Look at Job again. His forging begins with loss, but it doesn't end there. The pain excavates layers he didn't even know existed within him. Spiritual forging isn't just about proving who you are. It reveals who God wants you to become. The pain you're going through today may be taking away exactly what would prevent you from carrying what comes next. It's confrontation. It's cutting. It's purification. It's the fire that removes impurities that wouldn't fall away otherwise. God knows the resilience of every soul, and He adjusts the temperature according to the purpose being built. There is no forging without fire. There is no strong vessel without pressure. There is no unshakable soul without moments when everything seems about to break. And what's most disconcerting is that pain often reveals hidden intentions. It exposes pride, dependencies, small internal corruptions, buried fears. Pain forces you to look inside yourself without masks. When everything is going well, it's easy to think you're strong, righteous, aligned. But when the forging begins, when the fire touches the soul, what was hidden comes to the surface. This process is not only divine, it's necessary. Superficial faith doesn't survive spiritual confrontation. Deep faith is born precisely there, when you realize you no longer have control over anything and yet you choose to trust. The spiritual forge also separates what is yours from what should never have been. People who drift away, situations that fall apart, structures that crumble, all of this is part of the divine hammering. God removes, cuts, adjusts, dismantles, and rebuilds. Pain is not the end. It is the exact process that makes room for what He is about to build within you. And the most impactful thing is that the forge is never silent. There is conflict, there is shouting, there is spiritual shock. And at the same time, there is a kind of divine presence that becomes stronger in pain than in joy. Because when you enter the fire, God doesn't watch from afar. He enters with you. The spiritual forge is not the place where God abandons you. It is the place where He transforms you. And while Job bled, something within him was also being molded. He was already faithful before the pain, but became unshakable afterward. He already had faith before the fall, but developed depth after the losses. Fire reveals the truth. Pain reveals the essence. The spiritual forge reveals the purpose. And the question that echoes for you now is, what is your pain trying to mold? What part of you is being hammered, heated, transformed? It's uncomfortable, but it's real. There are dimensions of faith that only emerge when everything that sustained you falls. And it is there, exactly there, that God begins to build something new. Before we move on to the next part, I want you to join me in this deep reflection. Comment, "I am in the forge," or simply "forge," if this part resonated with you. This helps the video reach more people and shows that you are firmly committed to this journey. When suffering is not divine, it's an attack. The atmosphere changes, the weight changes, the impact changes. Because there is a spiritual line, thin but real, that separates the pain God allows to mold you from the pain the enemy inflicts to destroy you. And understanding this difference is the point that separates those who mature in faith from those who shipwreck without understanding what they are experiencing. Divine pain perfects you. Evil pain deforms you. Divine pain draws you closer. Evil pain tries to tear you away from His presence. And when you realize this, Your vision changes, your spiritual sensitivity increases, and your posture in the face of suffering is completely transformed. The first sign that suffering is an attack is simple. It tries to paralyze what God is moving. It comes to the mind like an arrow. It comes to the soul like a shadow. It comes into the environment like a weight. And it always tries to disconnect you from your spiritual identity. While God uses pain as a forge, the enemy uses it as a prison. He wants to isolate, destabilize, discourage. He wants to interrupt spiritual processes before they mature. He wants confusion to become stronger than faith, anxiety to become louder than the voice of God, doubt to speak louder than the promise. And perhaps you have already felt this kind of suffering, the kind that doesn't mold you but drains you, the kind that doesn't teach you but confuses you, the kind that seems to have no purpose, as if it were just chaos, noise, disturbance. This type of spiritual attack doesn't arise because God is distant, but because you are too close to what He wants to do. Every time the kingdom advances, the darkness stirs. Every time you break a spiritual cycle, a new confrontation appears. Not because you are weak, but because you are growing. The attack doesn't arise in a void, it arises on the edge of the promise. And the way the enemy acts is always strategic. He tries to pressure specific points, fragile emotions, memories you haven't closed, insecurities you haven't dealt with. He touches old wounds to produce new pain. He creates emotional storms to shake internal structures. He distorts thoughts so that you interpret everything from the angle of fear. Spiritual attack almost never appears as something blatantly supernatural. It presents itself as exaggerated worry, unexplained tiredness, persistent anguish, repeated interruptions, conflicts that arise out of nowhere, spiritual heaviness in the environment. It's a war fought in micro-movements, but there's another essential detail. The attack always aims to steal three things: your faith, your vision, and your purpose. If it succeeds in making you doubt, it has already weakened your journey. If it succeeds in making you blind, it has already left you vulnerable. If it succeeds in making you forget who you are, it has already spiritually distorted you. Therefore, differentiating divine suffering from malevolent suffering is urgent, because when it's God, the pain elevates you. When it's an attack, the pain imprisons you. When it's God, you go through the fire and come out purer. When it's an attack, you go through the weight and come out more tired. And perceiving this difference is a spiritual skill, not an emotional one. And here's a point that almost no one talks about. The enemy doesn't attack just any area. He attacks the area where God is about to act. If you are being attacked in your mind, it's because God is about to broaden your vision. If you are being attacked in your family, it's because God is about to restore something profound there. If you are being attacked in your faith, it's because God is about to release something that requires high confidence. The attack is a shadow that reveals the direction of the light. It tries to confuse you, but ends up revealing what God is about to do. And there's another common misconception. Many people think that because they are suffering, God is angry. But spiritual attacks don't reveal divine wrath. They reveal threats of hell. If you are facing a burden that seems strange, exaggerated, disconnected from logic, something that tries to dismantle you from the inside out, something that doesn't align with what God has planted in your heart, this is a sign that you are on the right path. Spiritual attacks are often disguised confirmations. They are resistance. They are opposition. They are attempts to distract those who are about to break through. And the most dangerous thing is not the attack itself, but the misinterpretation of it. When you think it's God punishing you, you surrender, lower your guard, and accept it as part of the process. But when you understand it's an attack, you take a stand. You react. You pray. You keep your mind sharp. You protect your vision. You guard your heart. The attack only thrives when it finds a confused heart. When you discern, the battle changes. And I want you to realize something now. Perhaps what you are facing today is not God's work. It's the enemy's assault. Perhaps the weight, the exhaustion, the repetitive anguish, the fear that tries to creep in, the discouragement that appears without logic, all of this is not part of the divine plan, but a spiritual attack to paralyze you before the turning point that God is preparing. And just by hearing this, your soul is already beginning to identify something, because the Spirit recognizes when a truth touches its center. Before we move on, I want you to tell me in the comments, do you think you're experiencing forging or attack? Comment with the words forge or attack, so I know where you are on this journey. This greatly helps the video reach more people and strengthens our community. The hidden purpose in chaos is that spiritual reality that no one sees while they are broken, while they are in the valley, while everything seems out of order. It's that moment when you look around and find no meaning, but deep down, something insists on pushing you forward, as if there were an invisible stitching holding your story together, even when you think it should have already torn. And it is precisely there, at that point where everything seems to crumble, that the deepest spiritual turning points begin to form. Not in euphoria, not on the mountaintop, not in comfort, but in the valley, in chaos, in the silence where no one sees you. Because the valley is the place where God works transformations that the surface would never allow. And perhaps you've already noticed this in your own cycles. The major breakups didn't stem from your moments of stability, but from your darkest periods. Those times when prayer seemed to reach no further than the ceiling, where faith trembled like a weak lamp, where pain seemed to be the only thing that answered when you called out. But what no one told you is that spiritually chaos is not a sign of abandonment. It's a sign of movement. It's the terrain where God hides processes that couldn't be carried out in calm. Because when you're comfortable, you cling. When you're safe, you don't move. When you're stable, you don't question your own structure. But when everything collapses, you're forced to look inward, upward, to the invisible. And that's where real change begins. God never wastes a valley. He never wastes chaos. He never wastes pain. There are moments in the journey where it seems like everything has turned upside down: relationships, emotional health, finances, spiritual stability, inner peace. And you think, how can this have any purpose? But the answer is always deeper than your mind can grasp in the midst of the storm. Because the purpose of chaos is not in what you feel, but in what you become when you go through it. And that is what differentiates empty suffering from transformative suffering. Hell wounds you to destroy you. God allows breakages to rebuild you. And that's when spiritual turning points begin to emerge, not like instant magic, but like small rays of light piercing the darkness. Sometimes the turning point begins with a thought that visits you out of nowhere and ignites something within you. Sometimes it's a sudden realization that changes your understanding of pain. Sometimes it's a strength you didn't have yesterday, but that appears today and makes you rise. These turning points are rarely visible at first. They are silent, discreet, but powerful, and they usually happen when you are so tired that nothing remains but the truth. Nothing but essence, nothing but spirit. And there's a spiritual detail that almost no one notices. God hides answers within chaos because it's in chaos that you are most receptive. The external noise has subsided. The distractions have disappeared. The illusions have been shattered. And what seemed like destruction begins to reveal itself as redirection. The valley is not punishment, it's reorganization. It's the place where God removes what doesn't serve you, cuts away what holds you back, reveals what you didn't want to see, and strengthens what was weak. But He does this in such a profound way that you only understand it after you've been through it. No one understands the valley while they're inside it. Understanding only comes at the end of the process. And perhaps you're exactly at that point right now, between pain and revelation, between collapse and meaning, between silence and the voice you haven't yet heard. And I tell you this with spiritual clarity, there is a hidden purpose there. There is something that will only be born because everything collapsed first. There are answers that will only emerge because the chaos forced you to ask questions you would never ask in calmer times. There is a new level of faith, of discernment, of spiritual vision that only awakens when the ground disappears. The crisis is not destroying you, it is positioning you. And notice something else. Every spiritual turning point happens where your strength ends and divine strength begins. The valley reveals limits, chaos reveals weaknesses. And God uses this not to humiliate you, but to align you. He breaks what you built with your own hands to rebuild it with His. He interrupts paths that would lead you to emptiness, to redirect you to your purpose. He exposes deceptions you didn't see to set you free. He pulls you out of routines that were slowly killing you. And He does all this through processes that seem confusing, but are actually spiritual surgeries. And here's the most intense part. The turning point never begins when the chaos ends. It begins in the middle. It begins when you decide to stay even without understanding. When you pray even without feeling. When you continue even without clarity. The spiritual turning point isn't born from victory. It's born from resistance. From that quiet strength you don't even know where it comes from, but that makes you advance one step a day. And it's that step, repeated in the dark, that builds the turning point in the end. And before we move on to the next part, I want you to write a sentence in the comments that will test your own faith amidst the chaos. I don't understand, but I continue. Comment this to show that you're still standing, even in the valley, and so that this video reaches more people who need to hear this truth. God's justice in the midst of pain is one of those spiritual truths that dismantles our human logic, because everything within us expects justice to mean immediate deliverance, absolute protection, instant restoration. But divine justice does not manifest itself at the same pace as our impatience. It does not operate with shortcuts. It does not work with impulses. It does not yield to the emotional despair we feel when we are hurt. God's justice is profound, precise, and often silent, because it is not a justice that merely repairs what the enemy has touched. It is a justice that reveals, transforms, adjusts, exposes, and redirects. It is a justice that makes pain a gateway to revelation, not a sentence of destruction. And this is where many people get lost. When pain arrives, the first question is why? But spiritually, the more accurate question is, for what purpose? Because divine justice is not limited to what you feel now. It extends to what you will be after this process. God does not see your pain as an isolated episode. He sees it as part of a construction, as a point within a larger line that He already sees from beginning to end. And that is why, many times, God's justice allows you to experience moments that you would interpret as injustice. Because He is not focused on the moment, He is focused on the spiritual outcome. Divine justice does not respond to your despair. It responds to your purpose. And if you look at the Bible, you'll notice one thing. Every profound revelation is born from a moment of pain. Every spiritual turning point was born from a valley. Every new vision emerged from a loss, a silence, a confrontation, an anguish that seemed impossible to bear. This doesn't mean that God rejoices in suffering, but it means that He knows how to use pain to open doors that would never open in comfort. Divine justice is revealed in the midst of pain, because that's where you are sensitive, open, vulnerable, and truly willing to listen. Pain tears the veil, exposes the ego, breaks down resistance, and when that barrier falls, God speaks in a way you would never hear on peaceful days. Divine justice also corrects distorted perceptions. Sometimes you see loss, and God sees deliverance. Sometimes you see delay, and God sees protection. Sometimes you see chaos, and God sees rearrangement. There is a moment in pain when everything inside you wants to resist, wants to return to what it was, wants to recover what was lost. But divine justice doesn't return what would only keep you trapped. It returns what pushes you forward. Divine justice doesn't rebuild what was destroying you from within. It rebuilds you to endure what comes next. And there is enormous spiritual weight to this. God's justice never aims to break you. Pain may shatter your illusions, your attachments, your human expectations, but it never breaks your destiny. Divine justice operates so that pain does not destroy what is essential, but rather what is superfluous, unnecessary, dangerous, or hindering in your spiritual journey. It is a surgical cut, not a mutilation. It is an adjustment, not an abandonment. It is a revelation, not a tragedy. God uses pain as a lens. While you are crying, He is showing you something. While you are losing, He is positioning you. While you are being hurt, He is healing you from within in ways you do not yet understand. And it is at this point that many fail to realize what is happening. Divine justice does not first manifest itself in the situation, but in its transformation. You change before the circumstances change. Your posture changes before the doors open. Your vision changes before the answer arrives. And this change is a sign that God is already acting. Spiritually, every situation changes first within you and only then outside, because true justice is not just correcting what was done to you, it's correcting what that generated within you. Bitterness, fear, discouragement, doubt, inner turmoil. God does not let that govern your soul. Divine justice removes the poison before removing the arrow. And how do you know when divine justice is at work? It's not when everything gets easier, it's when everything starts to make sense. When an inexplicable peace appears in the midst of struggle, when a sudden clarity visits you in the midst of confusion, when your faith, which was weak, begins to breathe again, when you realize that you are not being destroyed by pain, but shaped by it. This is the mark of divine justice. Pain doesn't bring you down, it awakens you. It doesn't kill you, it molds you. It doesn't distance you from God, it brings you closer to Him. And this reveals something extremely profound. Divine justice always works in favor of what you will need in the future, not just what you want in the present. And before we move on to the next part, which will delve even deeper into this revelation about how God transforms pain into destiny, leave a comment below with a phrase that will strengthen others who are also going through intense processes. God is doing justice in my story. In comment to show that you are discerning what is happening in your life, and so that this video reaches more people. So we continue, delving even deeper into that territory where pain ceases to be merely a wound and begins to pulsate like a spiritual key hidden in the shadows. Because the redemption that springs from suffering never appears in an obvious way, never surfaces. It grows silently, like a seed buried so deeply that no one imagines anything living could sprout from it. And it is precisely at this point that many give up, because they look at the hard soil, the dark valley, the dry desert, and conclude that nothing can flourish there. But the kingdom works in reverse to human logic. It always has. The seed dies to be born. Night falls to reveal the light. The heart breaks to be molded. The journey tightens before opening. And it is in this divine paradox that your story begins to change direction. Because there is a specific moment, almost always invisible, when God interrupts the pain, not by taking it away from you, but by igniting something within you that didn't exist before. It's a moment that many people call strength, others call overcoming, but the truth is deeper. It's redemption, pure and absolute, born from that which tried to destroy you. And when this turning point happens, you usually don't realize it right away. The realization comes later, when you look back and think, if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be who I am today. This is the kind of revelation that isn't received in crowded temples, but in silent valleys. It's the kind of revelation that doesn't come through celebration, but through scars. Because scars are memorials. They are marks that say, I survived. I moved forward. I was transformed. And whether you like it or not, you are carrying some right now. Perhaps still open. Perhaps still burning. But they are already being molded to become living proof that suffering does not defeat those who carry purpose. And notice how, within this spiritual scenario, nothing is wasted. No tear falls in vain. No loss vanishes with the wind. No blow from life fails to carry some kind of embedded instruction. And the more you try to understand why certain battles were so heavy, the more you realize that there is a type of growth that only happens within adversity. It is in chaos that the human spirit learns to listen. It is in the desert that sensitivity increases. It is in the valley that the soul becomes more aware of heaven. It is when everything crumbles that we finally see what was hidden. And you have already noticed this in your own journey. Every time something broke you in two, something new was awakened. Every time a door closed, another dimension of your strength began to manifest. Every time someone hurt you, you were repositioned to a new level of understanding. This is not by chance. This is redemption in the form of a process. And however brutal it may sound, there are pains that come so that you never again accept certain chains. There are losses that come to cut you off from environments that would suffocate your spirit. There are falls that come to crush the pride that kept your purpose imprisoned. There are betrayals that come to reveal exactly who should never have had access to your secrets. And God allows these ruptures because He knows no warrior is born comfortable. No mission is activated in a cotton cradle. No spiritual destiny is fulfilled easily. It is in shock that consciousness awakens. It is in fire that character is forged. It is on the ground that identity is consolidated. The deeper the pain, the deeper the revelation it carries. And notice how this fits into what we're building in this video. Your understanding that redemption isn't just about being healed. It's about being transformed to the point of never returning to your previous state. It's as if God were saying, I didn't allow this pain to destroy you. I allowed this pain to redefine you. And that's why so many situations you faced seemed unfair, disproportionate, overwhelming, because they weren't meant to destroy you, but to activate a version of you that was dormant. And this awakened version doesn't bend easily, doesn't retreat easily, isn't easily deceived. It sees further, feels deeper, discerns more clearly, and carries a weight of purpose that only exists in those who have crossed dark valleys. Therefore, as we move forward from here, it's essential that you truly connect with this message, because the next part will delve even deeper into this revelation, and I need you to be with me. So, before we continue, comment below with a word that resonated with you during this reflection. It could be redemption, purpose, transformation, or any phrase that ignited something in your spirit. This keeps you engaged and also helps propel this video to reach more people who are going through the same struggle as you. And while you're at it, like and subscribe now, because what comes next is the most intense part of this journey, and I don't want you to miss any details. So let's move towards this final stretch, but not as one who concludes a story, but rather as one who crosses a threshold. Because now we enter that silent, dense, almost sacred space where the soul finally faces the question it has avoided throughout the journey. The question that doesn't scream, but echoes. The question that doesn't hurt, but pierces. The question that doesn't disappear, even when you try to ignore it. The question that appears on the pillow, in the early morning, in the short breath after a heavy day, in the lost gaze when everything seems too big. And this question is the exact point where pain ceases to be raw suffering and transforms into direction. It is here that the narrative changes. It is here that the spirit awakens. It is here that you understand what has always been lurking in your life, waiting for you to be ready to hear it. Because pain never knocked on your door by chance. It never entered without reason. It never settled in without purpose. It always carried a message, a warning, a call. And the more you ran from it, the more it pursued you, not to punish you, but to guide you, because some answers only emerge when there's nowhere left to hide. Some revelations only arrive when the ground disappears, and it is precisely at this point that the question arises like a spiritual blade. If pain is a call, where is it trying to lead you? This question dismantles, disarms, exposes. It removes the veil from suffering and sheds light on its meaning. It transforms chaos into a compass, tears into direction, falls into invitations. And this is where you begin to realize that everything you've experienced, absolutely everything, was trying to move you somewhere. Perhaps away from people who diminished you, perhaps closer to truths you ignored, perhaps into a strength you didn't know you possessed, perhaps out of environments where your soul was slowly dying, perhaps upwards to a spiritual level where your vision, your faith, your identity would cease to be fragile. Because no one awakens in comfort, no one discovers purpose in applause, no one sees their mission while anesthetized. It is pain that tears through spiritual anesthesia. It is pain that forces you to look inward. It is pain that pulls you out of the zone where you are hiding. It is pain that pushes you, not always gently, to the place where you should have been from the beginning. And when you look back with courage, you notice a pattern. Nothing was random, nothing was wasted, nothing was left useless in the process. Each loss shaped something. Each frustration opened a crack. Each broken cycle revealed another layer of your spirit. Each dark night amplified your sensitivity, and that feeling of "this doesn't make sense" always appeared before a realignment. It's as if heaven itself allowed certain ruptures to pull you off the wrong path. And you felt it. Even if you couldn't name it, you felt that internal pressure, that spiritual discomfort, that deep weariness that wasn't physical. It was your spirit being pulled in another direction, and even without understanding, you kept walking. Maybe stumbling, maybe bleeding inside, maybe without strength, but walking. And that's why you're here now, because the pain fulfilled its purpose. It brought you to the frontier of change, and the question returns. Silent, firm, inevitable. If pain is a calling, where is it trying to lead you now? This is the most intense part, because it's no longer about the past. Now, it's about you deciding what to do with what you've learned. It's no longer about surviving, it's about interpreting. It's no longer about what happened to you, it's about what you will become after this. Because there comes a moment when God stops dragging you and starts asking you, so, will you continue running away, or will you finally embrace who you are? It's the spiritual turning point that transforms victims into warriors, survivors into visionaries, the wounded into messengers. It's when pain ceases to be the enemy and becomes the instructor. And perhaps the answer from your soul is already beginning to form now, as you take a deep breath listening to these words. Perhaps you are realizing that the pain was calling you to grow, to break free, to mature spiritually, to abandon versions of yourself that no longer fit where you are going, to leave behind habits that held you back, to cut ties that drained your energy, to finally listen to what your intuition has been whispering for years. Or perhaps the pain is calling you to something even greater, to serve, to inspire, to teach, to transform other lives through the story you lived. Because no wound carries redemption only for the one who suffered it. Redemption always transforms into light for others who are still in darkness. And it is on this exact border that I leave you with this powerful reflection. Before we move on to the rest of this content, comment below with the phrase, "The pain calls me," or the word awakening, or any other word that resonated with you during this journey. This helps you solidify this understanding and further strengthens the spiritual reach of this video. And of course, like and subscribe now, because the next chapter will take this revelation to an even deeper level, and you won't want to miss it.